Father, it's so good to be able to get together to study your word, just to know that you're present with us, that you'll guide our thoughts and our hearts in the right direction to understand what's going on in the beginning in Genesis. Just thank you for the ones that are here. Bless them and their families. Watch over all of us, Father. We praise you for your love, your watch care. Most of all, we thank you for what you've done for us through Christ, through his sacrifice. It's in his name we praise and honor you. Amen. Okay. A long time ago, we decided there was 3 things that you have to have a nation. God's telling Abraham that he's going to make him a great nation. You have to have land, people, and a government. Last time we covered the land. Tonight we're going to cover the people. We're going to see where the Jewish race come from and who made up the Jewish race. And something that I had thought of before but kind of forgot, God, before he called Abraham, there was no distinction between the people. They were all, I guess, the same race. You know, there wasn't Jew and Gentile. And until God called Abraham, there wasn't a Jew. But he started the Jewish race with Abraham.
But there were different ethnicities of us. But when Abraham is Syrian, I kept thinking.
Well, that's where they were from, so they called them Syrians. But as far, I suppose there were different people groups like that, where they lived and come from. You all still have your bookmark? You have one there? Jack?
You got an extra one on tape.
Pass that one to Marilyn. I want to read Miles Coverdale quote on here. This was written in the 1500s by Miles Coverdale. It shall greatly help you to understand Scripture if you mark not only what is spoken or written, but ask of whom and to whom, with what words, at what time, where, to what intent, with what circumstance, considering what goes before and what comes after. So that's who, where, when, what, and who, and all that stuff. And something else that you can add to that that's just as important is what the Bible does not say. You know, how many times have you been in a Bible study when somebody will say, well, doesn't the Bible say this? No, it doesn't. It's something that someone else that they listen to said. I want to read on the other side of that 2 Timothy 2:15. Study to show thyself approved unto God, a workman that need not be ashamed, rightly dividing the word of truth. We shouldn't be ashamed to mention God or to witness to people, but we need to know what the word says before we can be a good witness. Okay, we're looking at the Abrahamic covenant. We're going to start a little bit in chapter 12, verses 1 through 4. Okay. Now the Lord had said unto Abram, get thee out of thy country, from thy kindred, and from thy father's house, unto a land that I will show thee. I will make of thee a great nation. There it is, the promise of making him a great nation, that you need the land, people, and government. And I will bless thee, and make thy name great, and thou shalt be a blessing. And And I will bless them that bless thee, and curse him that curses thee. And in thee shall all the families of the earth be blessed. So Abram departed, as the Lord had spoken unto him, and Lot went with him. And Abram was 75 years old when he departed from Haran. Haran is in northern or north of Israel in Syria. And that's where they settled until Abraham's father died. And then Abraham and Lot, when Abraham was 75 years old, went into the promised land. And I like to compare the Old Testament with the New Testament. I want to turn to Ephesians chapter 2. Verses 11 through 13. Ephesians 2, 11 through 13. And this is Paul writing to the Ephesian believers, Gentile believers. Wherefore remember that you, being in time past Gentiles in the flesh, they were born Gentiles, they wasn't Jews. That's the only two difference that the Bible makes between people, are Jews and Gentiles. If you're not a Jew, you're a Gentile. Gentiles in the flesh who are called uncircumcision by that which is called the circumcision in the flesh made by hands. So the Jews referred to the Gentiles as uncircumcised. That at that time you were without Christ, being alien from the commonwealth of Israel. The Gentiles didn't live in Israel, they lived outside of Israel. And strangers from the covenant of promise. So the Abrahamic covenant and all the land covenant and the covenant that God makes after Abraham is made with the Jews, not the Gentiles. The only part of the covenant that we're included in is all the families of the earth will be blessed. And we know that's by Christ. Okay, verse 12 again, that at that time you were without Christ, being aliens from the commonwealth of Israel, strangers from the covenants and promises, having no hope and without God in the world. So that was the condition of the Jews until, I believe, Paul started his ministering to the Gentiles. The 12 apostles, we know Peter went to Cornelius' house, but for the most part, they ministered to the Jews. And verse 13 is the flip side of what 11 and 12 says. It says, but now in Christ Jesus, you who sometime were afar off are made nigh by the blood of Christ. So that tells who the covenant was made with, and it was not made with the Gentiles. Okay, we'll go back to Genesis. Genesis 13. We'll read 14 through 16. We're kind of going to do a Reader's Digest version and go all the way through Genesis and see where the Jewish people came from after God called Abraham out. Okay, chapter 13, verses 14 through 16. And the Lord said to Abram, after that Lot was separated from him, lift up thine eyes and look from this place where thou art, northward, southward, eastward, and westward. For all the land which thou seest, to thee will I give it, and to thy seed forever. How long is forever?
Into eternity.
It's a long time. So this, it says right there in the Bible that it's forever, so that's still the Jews' land. And, Kelly got the map out, one of the maps that I gave you, you know, that takes in part of Egypt, let's see, part of Saudi Arabia, all of Jordan, lot, or quite a bit of Syria, all of Lebanon, what else? I can't,
It goes all the way to the Euphrates River, I believe that.
it does.
And here they are, still fighting over
Yeah, but I don't think they ever,
every day.
I don't wanna, well, I don't think that covenant has been fulfilled yet, has it?
No, no, it has not. They've never inhabited all the land. It goes from, the Red Sea, the one fork that goes up to Egypt, and one goes to Israel, and from there over to the Persian Gulf and up to the Euphrates River. So it's a big area, and that's yet to be fulfilled in inhabiting all the land. Okay, in verse 16, I will make thy seed as dust of the earth, so that if a man can number the dust of the earth, then shall the seed also be numbered. So we know you can't number the dust on the earth, so it's going to be a lot of people. But, you know, Israel has never, or the Jewish race has never been a big population. Even today, there's something around 18 million Jews worldwide. And, but there's almost no Jews left in Russia, Germany. They've all gone back to the homeland. The biggest population is in the US, and that's something around 6 million.
Are there more Jews here than in Israel, you think?
No.
No.
There used to be, but now it's to the point that there's over 7 million, pushing 8 million, I think, in Israel.
I know we talked about this before, but how much Jewish heritage you have to be a Jew? I mean, it's just because we hear all the time about American Indians. I'm American Indian because my great-great-granddad
Yeah.
was a full, you know.
Right.
Okay, does that make you an Indian, or does it make you, American? You know what I'm saying? I don't know the answer. I'm just
I don't
speaking.
either.
I mean, it doesn't matter, I guess. If you got any Jewish in you, I guess you could claim Jewish heritage, couldn't you?
And I think, how do you go back and become a nation in 1948? How do they know their bloodline? I don't know,
That they did keep track of a lot of it, and you had a Jewish roommate, and he got married while you were there. Did he marry a Jewish girl?
He did not, but she converted to
She
Judaism.
convert, okay.
She was a Christian, and I just shook my head. And at the time, I didn't even, I understood that Jews didn't believe in Jesus, but I never knew, how terrible that was, I guess. I don't know, that seems like a bad word, but
Yeah.
he was a fine man, and so was she. But then when she converted to basically deny Christ, that was like, oh. That's just, I still can't get over that, really.
Yeah. But we all know Jewish people, they were supposed to marry another Jew. And if you don't marry another Jew, then they have to convert, or supposed to anyhow.
Yeah, but she's not Jewish,
Right.
but she's a Jew. She practices Judaism, which,
And,
again, that's interesting too.
yeah, and practicing Judaism don't make you a Jew either.
Well, I
But
wouldn't think so.
But I don't know the answer either.
But they kept their bloodline pretty clean, because when God told Abraham to seek a wife for, help me out,
Isaac and Jacob,
they sent him back to this same
yeah,
area, so
and you know that seems a little odd to me, because what was Abraham and his family before they left, or the Chaldees? They were-
Same as everybody else.
they were all idol worshipers. And, but anyhow, evidently, God knew Abraham well enough to know that he could call him and he would do what he needed him to do. And, but the people in Canaan were idol worship, pagans, you know. But anyhow, he sent back to his family, Isaac married Rebekah, and that was his first cousin. And I think Jacob done the same thing. Laban was
His mother
was Nahor's brother, I think. Anyhow, it was a pretty close family, but the gene pool is still clean. Okay, now we're gonna go, and notice this was done when Abraham and Lot separated. Did Abraham go into the promised land? No. He, where did he end up? Not the Edomites, the Ammonites. Is it, anyhow, it was, I think it was the Ammonites.
you know that law.
Yes. Anyhow, he did not go into the promised land or become a Jew, so to speak. Okay, chapter 15, verse 1 through 6. And these things, the word of the Lord came unto Abram in a vision, saying, Fear not, Abram, I am thy shield and thy exceeding great reward. And Abram said to the Lord, God, what wilt thou give me, seeing that I go childless? And the steward of my house is Eliezer of Damascus. And Abram said, Behold, to me thou hast given no seed, and lo, one born in my house is mine heir. And behold, the word of the Lord came unto him, saying, This shall not be thine heir, but he that come forth out of thine own bowels shall be thine heir. And he brought him forth abroad, he took him outside and told him to look up now towards heaven and tell the stars if you are able to number them. And he said unto him, So shall your seed be. And he believed in the Lord, and it was counted unto him for righteousness. I think not long ago, well, we've done Romans, and Romans 4, 1 through 5 talks about Abraham. Believe God, and it's counted to him as righteousness. And Paul is still talking about that 2,000 years later.
And of course, if Abraham had died without a seed, I mean, which wasn't gonna happen, but he was concerned about it.
Yeah, he was.
So he was thinking, well, we can't really live out that covenant if you don't give me an heir.
Yeah.
Or he was trying to ask God if he's wanting to substitute this other guy, I guess, right?
Yeah.
Basically saying, is he supposed to be my heir then, since I don't have any? Right?
Yeah.
So he understood the import of it, I think.
Yeah. He understood how important it was.
And he believed by faith, yet he messed up. Which, I don't even want to go that direction, but that's how he thought that.
And, you know, everybody would think that the Jews or Abraham should have been under the law, but the law doesn't come till 400 years later. So Abraham had nothing to do with the law. In fact, he'd already died before Moses was given the law. But God promises him a son, and in Genesis 21, 1 through 3 tells about the promised son. And the Lord visited Sarah as he seed, and bear Abraham a son in his old age, at a set time of which God had spoken to him. Abraham called the name of his son that was born to him, whom Sarah bare to him, Isaac. How many times does it say over and over that it's Abraham and Sarah's son, offspring, not? And we all know that Abraham had a child, Ishmael, by the Egyptian handmaid, and that wasn't God's idea, that was Sarah's idea. And Abraham liked the sound of it, so he went along with it, but it wasn't the promised son. And that's what they're all fighting about over there today.
Messed up big time.
It started here. Okay.
I've got a note here, and I'm sure you've told me this before, that Ishmael was 16 to 18 years of age when Isaac was weaned. So he was like a teenager, or
Yeah.
probably a grown man at that time for that generation, or that
Yeah.
society, whatever you want to name
It makes it sound like he's a little child, but you're right, he was 16, 18 years old when Abraham ended up sending him away. And, but let's see, in 21:10 through 14, it tells what happened. That Abraham did send him off, but it was really grieving Abraham because that was his son. But God told him to listen to Sarah this time, because Sarah told him to go away. But in verse 18, arise, lift up the lad, and behold him in thy hand, for I will make him a great nation. Who is that great nation? It's theirs. Yep. So there's the rub that's still going on today. In Genesis 24, and I'm not going to sing, or not going to read it, but Jack was talking about it just a while ago. Abraham sends a steward back to the city of Nahor, which is in Haran. That's Nahor's his brother. Isaac couldn't marry a Canaanite, so they went back to the family and got a wife for him. And in verse 67 of 24, it said, and Isaac brought her, this is Rebekah, after the servant brings Rebekah back from the family. And Isaac brought her into his mother's Sarah's tent and took Rebekah, and she became his wife, and he loved her, and Isaac was comforted after his mother's death. And so that just tells all the stuff that they went through to go back to the family and to bring somebody back for Isaac to marry. And in Genesis 25, 19 through 26. And these are the generation of Isaac, Abraham's son. Abraham begot Isaac. Isaac was 40 years old when he took Rebekah to wife, the daughter of Bethuel, the Syrian of Padanaram, the sister of Laban, the Syrian. And Isaac entreated or prayed that for the Lord for his wife, because she was barren, and the Lord was entreated of him, and Rebekah his wife conceived. And the children struggled together within her, and she said, if it be so, why am I thus? In other words, if this is such a great thing that I conceive, why am I having so much trouble? Why is all this struggle going on in me? And she went and inquired of the Lord, and the Lord said unto her, 2 nations are in thy womb, two manners of people shall be separated from thy bowels, and the one people shall be stronger than the other people, and the elder shall serve the younger. So there's the two nation, the Jewish nation and the Arab nation is born. Who am I trying to say? Who's the twins? Esau and Jacob.
They were the Edomites, I believe, weren't they? Somewhat.
Yes.
Esau.
Yes. That's when we were in Jordan, or Jordanian guy that was, how do you say, Edom, anyhow, he really talked about the Edomites a lot. Of course, the Edomites were in Jordan, on kind of the line between Jordan and Israel.
And I'm thinking the Edomium from the Edomites was kind of taken over around that area that they lived in when Babylon, I think, came. Yeah, it's another mess, I
Yeah,
guess.
there's a lot of messes.
That verse reminds me of, I think it's in Isaiah where he says he knew you in the womb, right?
Yeah,
And so he knew these two boys, these twins,
yeah,
and they were the same age, right, at the time, but he knew he was gonna be born first, and who was gonna, it's just amazing really, isn't it?
and
To think of it.
God always goes the other way of the natural, you know. Naturally, the firstborn son is the one who always gets the double blessing and all, you know. But here it says the younger or the elder will serve the younger.
And that's because he knew how they were gonna be,
Yeah.
right? Yeah, it's just amazing.
And, you know, in Hebrews, in the faith chapter, it talks about not being like Esau. And there's, I can't remember where it's at, but it says that the Arabs basically are a donkey of men.
Well, like wild asses or something, I think, yeah,
Yeah.
wild men.
Yeah, they're hard to get along with, and they're still hard to get along with today. Okay, let's see. Verse 24 is where I got to, I think. And when her days be delivered, fulfilled, behold, they were twins in her womb, and first came out all red, all over, like a hairy garment, and they called his name Esau. And after that came his brother out, and his hand took hold of Esau's heel, and his name was called Jacob. And Isaac was 80 years old when they were born. So Isaac was 40 up in verse 20 when he got married, and now he's 60. So you can really keep a good timeline on all this. Okay, now we need to look at Genesis 26, 1 through 4. And there was a famine in the land besides the first famine that was in the days of Abraham. And Isaac went unto Abimelech, king of the Philistines, unto Gerar. And the Lord appeared unto him and said, Go not down into Egypt, dwell in the land which I shall tell thee. Sojourn in this land, and I will be with thee, and will bless thee. For unto thee and unto thy seed I will give all these countries. See, this time it doesn't just say land, but it says countries. And I will perform the oath which I swear unto Abraham thy father. So here he tells him not to go in to Egypt. Egypt is a picture of the world. You know, they were pagans and idol worshipers. So God didn't want them there. And we know that Abraham, earlier when there was a famine, went to Egypt and got in trouble while he was there. So God's telling them now not to go to Egypt. chapter 27, again, we're not gonna read it, I'll just tell you what's going on some about it. And it tells how Jacob and Rebekah, that's Jacob's mother, tricked Isaac into giving Jacob the spiritual blessing. And Jacob had already bought the birthright from Esau for a bowl of soup when he come in hungry from hunting. So Jacob lives up to his name. His name means trickster or supplanter. Anyhow, Jacob may not have been a real nice guy. Kind of made Rebecca sound like not a real nice gal too.
She certainly was playing favorite.
Yeah, and we go on to see another favorite play out bad too. In chapter 29, Jacob goes to Haran to look for a wife. He meets Rachel. She's Laban's daughter. He's Nahor's son, who is Abraham's, Abraham and Nahor were brothers, that's right. Jacob made a deal with Laban, who is Nahor's son, I think that's right, to work for him for 7 years, and he'd give Jacob Rachel. But Laban tricked him and gave him Leah, and told him that it wasn't right for the first daughter or the second daughter to get married before the first daughter. Anyhow, that was a mess.
And I'm thinking that probably Rachel was a little more beautiful, because they always talk, I think if they talk about Leah, her eyes were weak,
Yeah.
or maybe not as, eye person, not as pretty, I guess.
Yeah. I think you're right. So Jacob had to work for Laban 7 more years to get Rachel. And how could that have been possible to trick him like that? But I heard one guy say, you don't understand darkness unless you're somewhere where there's no light. There was no electricity, lighting and stuff then. And they lived in tents, and he couldn't see to tell the difference. I don't know, sounds good.
That makes sense. I mean, I saw somebody knows an Amish wedding, they usually party till about midnight before the wedding.
Yeah,
Well, she's been around more before the wedding actually are consummated. So
Yeah.
it'd be after dark.
yeah,
Interesting. But also, to me, it just points out how the humanness of people and the flesh enters into all this too, right?
yeah,
And how, God may have had a plan, but all these humans kept getting in the way of this, God didn't have any problem carrying it out, but it's like all these human foibles got in the way.
Yeah, it makes me wonder sometimes how, if, Abraham and Rebecca would have just waited and had, Isaac without that mess, like it might have been a lot better off.
what would the world be like today?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, their humanness got in the way too, right?
Yeah,
And she later regretted it too.
yeah, it didn't take her long either, did it?
No, really, yeah.
And I don't think Rebecca, I don't know how much influence she had on Isaac, but even in that, if it had been waited, the promise was gonna go to him anyway. Did they need to do that?
Yeah,
Or they were waiting on God. I'm just kind of
yeah,
looking at it from a far off viewpoint, but
yeah. If they all had waited on God, and we could say the same thing, if we would wait on God's timing for everything, we'd be a lot better off today too.
I can look back at my life and see things if I just waited instead of
Yeah.
messed it up myself.
Okay, chapter 31, we're not gonna read, but it tells that Jacob leaves Laban, takes his wives and children, livestock, servants, and returns to the land of Canaan. And then we'll look at chapter 35 and read 16 through 19. 35, 16 through 19. And they journeyed from Bethel, and there was but a little way to come to Ephraim. And Rachel travailed, and she had hard labor. And it come to pass, when she was in hard labor, that the midwife said to her, Fear not, thou shalt have this son also. And it came to pass, as her soul was departing, for she died, that she called his name Benoni, and his father called his name Benjamin. And Rachel died, was buried in the way to Ephraim, which is Bethlehem. So there, and this is part of the family split here that we're talking about. This is Rachel, Jacob's favorite wife out of the four that he has. But anyhow, she dies, and after she bears it 2 sons. Question or comment on 35 up to what all that's going on? God does revisit the covenant as he goes through these different chapters. You know, it's promised to Abraham and to his seed, so he keeps reiterating part of the covenant and make sure that it's not forgotten.
When is this covenant going to be fulfilled on the land? And does it still apply? Does that covenant still apply? Those who curse Israel will be cursed. Those who bless Israel will be blessed.
I believe so.
I do too.
I believe it with all my heart. And I believe that this promise will be fulfilled in the millennial reign, in the 1,000-year reign.
A lot of people spiritualize that. I don't believe that. That's a literal millennial reign, and it has to be.
Yeah, it says that Christ will rule for 1,000 years from the throne of David.
Explain how they spiritualize that. I don't understand that.
I don't either.
What, so you think Abraham's brother, was he Jewish then, or was it just
Nope.
Abraham?
No,
So, he wasn't one of, so even though,
even his nephew wasn't Lot.
so if, they took the one boy to marry into his brother's family, does that make her Jewish because she married a Jewish man?
I suppose
Yeah.
that all that's hard to keep track of, and
Well, I mean, if you look at their line, there was the prostitute, we see Gentiles
yes,
seeping into the bloodline of the
Yeah.
Jews. The line's not good enough to come up with.
Right.
Prostitute, thank you, and there's a couple others,
Ruth. Those are all good stories, but I think that's a picture of God making it possible for everybody to have salvation. You know, he's dealing primarily in the Old Testament through the 4 Gospels. He's dealing with the Jews, but there's always exceptions. Like you said, even in the bloodline of Christ, there's exceptions. Okay, chapter 37. 27 and 28. Chapter 37, verse 27 and 28. To fill in a little bit behind this, or before this, Joseph is Jacob's favorite son out of the 12, and the others don't like him because they know Jacob doesn't make any bones about it, that is his favorite son. So they decide they're gonna kill him. Well, then they throw him in a pit till they decide what to do with him. And then they see this caravan coming, and they decide they'll sell him to the Ishmaelites. And that's what takes up in verse 27. Come, let us sell him to the Ishmaelites, and let not our hand be upon him. After all, he is our brother and our flesh. So they sell him. Then there passed by the Midianites, merchants, and they drew and lifted Joseph out of the pit and sold Joseph to the Ishmaelites for 20 pieces of silver. And they brought Joseph to Egypt. And chapter 39 and 341 we're not going to read. We couldn't begin to cover all this if we read all of it. But through those chapters, after the Ishmaelites take Joseph to Egypt, he's sold again, and Potiphar buys him. And Potiphar's wife accuses Joseph of trying to rape her. He ends up in prison, and while he's in prison, he ends up interpreting a dream for Pharaoh, and the dream was of the 7 good years and the 7 famine years. So there's 7 years of plenty and 7 years of famine that was in this dream that Joseph interpreted. And then again in 42, we're not going to read it, but Jacob, during this famine, knows that there's food in Egypt. He's heard about it. So he sends 10 of his sons to Egypt, but he keeps Benjamin, I guess after Joseph was no longer there, and he thinks he's dead, so now Benjamin's his favorite. So he keeps him at home. Of course, Joseph already in Egypt. And verse 8 says that Joseph recognized his brothers when they come down for food, but they didn't recognize Joseph. And Joseph ended up keeping one of the brothers and telling them to go back and bring their other brother down. So Jacob's having a fit about that, don't want Benjamin to go down, but finally he relents and lets the brothers take Benjamin back with them to Egypt. And then in chapter 45, Joseph tells his brother who he is, tells him not to worry, that he's not upset, that God's sitting there to preserve life. And Joseph sends them back to get their father and his father, and to bring all of their families to Egypt. And let's see, chapter 46. Comments or questions?
I'm having trouble remembering, but it wasn't until sometime after that Jacob realized the brothers had been the ones that got rid of Joseph, wasn't it? I mean, they lied to him about what happened to him, right?
Yeah, they did lie to him, and they didn't know about it until the second time they went down and Joseph revealed to them who he was, and then they went back to get him and bring, to get Jacob.
Then they had telling the truth at
Yeah.
some point.
Yeah.
Somebody came
Yeah.
clean. And I think I remember them saying, no, you tell him, you tell him. I'm not telling him, you tell him.
But I'm thinking, I know we skipped over, I'm thinking that they were gonna kill him, but Reuben stepped in and said, no,
Yeah.
we'll sell him, it seemed like to me.
Yeah. Yeah, Reuben was trying to save him, and he did. Okay, chapter
Did that happen after he'd had that relationship with his, I don't know, I guess it was rabbit, maybe that kind of made up for that.
Yeah.
That's my viewpoint, not how
Yeah.
it works.
That,
Kind of makes me wonder.
yeah. Yeah, we won't go into that, that's another one.
I just,
Chapter 46, 1 through 4. And Jacob has had the name changed now. He's now called Israel. And throughout the Bible, there's different times when it refers to Israel or called him Jacob. So you really have to pay attention to see what it's really talking about, whether it's talking about Israel the nation or Israel the man Jacob. And Israel took his sojourn with all that he had and came to Beersheba and offered sacrifice unto God, father of Isaac, God of Isaac, his father. Anyhow, and God spoke unto Israel in the vision of the night and said, Jacob, Jacob. See, there he called him Israel, now he calls him Jacob. And he said, Here am I. And he said, I am God, the God of thy father. Fear not to go down into Egypt, for I will there make of thee a great nation. I will go down with thee into Egypt, and will also surely bring thee up again. And Joseph shall put his hand upon thy eyes. And that means that Joseph will be in Israel or Jacob's presence when he dies and closes his eyes at death. But so here, God tells him it's okay to go to Egypt. And it seemed like punishment when God sent him to Egypt, but it wasn't a punishment. It was to make them a great nation while they're there in Egypt. And that verse 3, that's really an important verse to remember, because it says, I'll make thee a great nation while you're there in Egypt. They were there 430 years.
some other words that stick out to me too, when Moses asked God when he's on Mount Sinai, what should I tell them who you are? And he said, tell them I am.
Yeah.
And it says that twice there in the end of verse 2 and in verse 3. Here I am God.
The Bible don't contradict itself, does it? Why did God need to take the Israelites to Egypt? Why did he not just let them have the promised land?
Well, he said, Kelly, do you have something? Sometimes I tend to talk when I shouldn't, or let somebody else talk, but when he's talking to Moses, he's saying that wait until the Canaanites, their sin is filled to the brim, so I think they're very, deplorable is not the right, they're a degenerate bunch. And this might be, you may be able to take it up and I haven't studied this for a while, but maybe because they're not even allowed, when the time came, he sent them to take their land, and then they were supposed to kill them all, so it's a pretty, are they that way while they're there? I don't know, it doesn't really say that, I don't think, but is that the reason, or am I taking it the wrong way?
No, in Genesis 15, verse 16, it says, but in the fourth generation they shall come hither again, and the iniquities of the Amorites is not yet full. So God's given the Amorites 430 more years to change their mind and serve him, and we know they didn't. And but the second reason that I thought of you know, there's 70 Israelites that go into Egypt. 70 people couldn't inhabit the land and take over all that God is providing for them. So he had to make them a great nation before they went.
And we tend to think in our time, and God's got eternity.
Yep.
And so, you know, that 400 years to him is like, you know, I can't compare it to what it is to us, because you can't compare it to eternity.
What do we do our flesh? We want it now.
Yeah, but we didn't think in our, 87 years or 70 years or whatever, you know, think, oh, I gotta get this accomplished, because I don't have much time left. Well, God's got eternity. Right?
Yeah.
Time doesn't matter.
And maybe him 1,000 years.
Yeah, time doesn't matter. So he needed more time, he needed to get the humans more time to
Yeah.
procreate.
Is it, I don't think, I mean, that we're just, it doesn't really say that though, does it? I mean, we're making, is it?
Doesn't
So,
say.
well, I mean, as far as,
This is why.
yes.
No, except this, you know, their iniquity is not yet full.
And they're the ones that.
But I mean,
have
the
land.
70 years, I mean, to really say that, I mean, I mean, it fits what you're saying, but, yeah, that part.
70 years
Or the 70 people
Yeah.
taking over the land, yeah.
It doesn't say
Yeah,
that, but
it fits, yeah, I see.
and turn over to Exodus 1, the first 9 verses. And these are the names of the children of Israel which came into Egypt. Every man in his household came with Jacob. Reuben, Simeon, Levi, Judah, Issachar, Zebulun, and Benjamin, Dan, Naphtali, Gad, Asher, and all the souls that came out of the loins of Jacob were 70 souls, for Joseph was in Egypt already. And Joseph died, and all his brothers, and all that generation. And the children of Israel were fruitful and increased abundantly, and multiplied and waxed exceedingly mighty in the land, and the land was filled with them. Now there rose up a new king over Egypt, which knew not Joseph. And he said unto his people, behold, the people which are the Israelites, or it says the people, the children of Israel, are more mightier than we. It doesn't say that the 70 people couldn't take, but God was going to lead them into, the promised land, and take over their homes, their farms, their vineyards. They were going to walk into a land of milk and honey. And there it said there were 70 souls, and it listed Reuben, Simeon, Levi, Judah, Issachar was Leah's sons, 6 sons, and then Zebulun and Gad was her handmaid Zilpah, the 2 sons that she bore, Jacob, and then Joseph and Benjamin was Rachel's 2 sons before she died, and then her handmaid had Dan and Naphtali, if I didn't get some of them mixed up.
Well, it occurs to me that if they were the only ones there then, that would have kept the Jewish bloodlines, because the Egyptians wouldn't be there. They may have been, having sex with them or something, but, or trying to use them as, slaves.
Well, they didn't like sheep herders, I think, or something.
Yeah,
So
right.
They split them off.
Yeah, they wouldn't be taking them into their family, but it seemed to me that's their only choices then, right? Is for them to grow from that 70 people.
Yep. Yeah. So that's where the Jewish nation come from, is out of the land of Egypt. And it was a captivity, so to speak, but that was after the king that knew Joseph died, and then this new king didn't know Joseph and didn't care. What he cared about was there were more Israelites than there were Egyptians. and they were mightier, could take over. So that's the 12 tribes of Israel, and that's where the Jewish people come from, are these 12 brothers. I got done quicker than I thought I would.
So we got our people then, right?
Yep, we got the people, and,
Or God's got his people again.
yeah, and you think, how do 70 people become a nation? I believe of between 5 and 7 million come out of Egypt. How did they become that many people so quick?
God said they'll be fruitful and multiply, so I don't know.
I sat down with a calculator, and, you know, if each one of these had just half as many as Jacob did, he had 12, they had 6, and that'd make 6 times 6 is 36, and then 6 times 36, if each one had 6, it doesn't take long to get up to be a populous people. And a lot of people just think there's a few 100,000, but if you look in the war times, and it tells how many, like there were 600 and some thousand come from one tribe that are fighting age. So, you know, there were a lot more people than I ever thought there was.
Well, they had multiple wives too, didn't they? I mean, it wasn't like it was one family unit. I mean, I guess the man was the head of all of them, I guess, but it wasn't like, it wasn't like the women ran through their childbearing years, because I guess that was, next wife up, I suppose.
Yeah. And can you imagine being in Jacob's shoes and try to keep 4 wives happy? And when we were in,
I don't think it was important to them as it
Yeah.
is to us now.
when we were in
They're
Israel,
kind of like chattel there, I
yeah,
guess.
when we were in Israel, we saw some
Well,
of that.
Abraham had trouble keeping Sarah. Anyway, sorry.
But you know, even Abraham, when the 3 men come down, one of them was God, and the other 2 were angels. God, Jehovah, whoever you want that to be, I think it was Jesus Christ in what they call a theophany, an appearance early. But he asked where Sarah was, and Sarah was behind Abraham's tent and her tent, and that's the way they done it. They had, the man's tent was out front, and all his wives' tents were behind his in a line. And if you read all this, Leah asked Rachel, I forgot how this all took place. Anyhow, it ended up, Leah made a deal with Rachel for Jacob to come and stay in her tent or she got to go to his tent that night, actually, is the way it worked. But we don't understand stuff like that, but there's still a little bit of that goes on today. Arabs are like that. The battle.
Yeah, there was conflict,
Battle.
because it seemed like, Leah, well, I can have any more kids, so I'm gonna have some through my handmaid, and then Rachel, well, I'm gonna have more, so I'm gonna have, I think that's how it started in the handmaid.
Yeah.
So there's, like you said, there's a lot of, I'm sure that's not a happy marriage when you gotta keep 4 of them happy.
No.
I can't keep one, well, here's the recording.
Leah did kind of outdo Rachel though. She had 6, and then her handmaid had 2. Rachel only had 2, and her handmaid 2, so it was 8 to 4. Any other questions or comments? this is a lot of fun, I think, to study the Genesis, to see some of the stories and things that go on, you know, we just can't comprehend.
Well, I mean, to me, it shows that God still gave people free will too, because, I mean, he could have snapped his fingers and made it happen. But instead, he said, well, you know, let them, well, they'll get there eventually, I guess, you know, and they had to suffer for it too. But then, of course, the 70 years they spent in the wilderness, they suffered too.
Yeah.
All because of their stubbornness and stiff-neckedness.
And I don't even think, when you're talking about that, I was thinking that I don't think the Lord was gonna really have to fight them people. I'm thinking he was gonna send a bunch of hornets.
Yeah.
And it seemed like to me they weren't even going to battle for the
No,
land.
they
That's
wasn't.
what I'm thinking about.
They wouldn't, God was gonna drive them out.
Yeah.
And they were just, like I said, they were gonna go in and occupy their homes, or farms, or vineyards, everything. But we know it didn't happen that way because they wouldn't do what God asked them to do.
You know, if you can take that up to date, they still call that area, where the Palestinians, they call that Canaan. You notice that they called that Canaan before, and that's kind of unusual. They're still, they don't realize that, but, and the Palestinians say that's our, no, Palestine, no.
Yeah.
It's gonna be, they're talking about, we're gonna take it from the river to the sea, no.
Yeah.
Like you said, in that millennium, they're not gonna be there.
And Gaza, well, I think it's on the map that Kelly has, that Gaza was there from the start. And it's the Gaza Strip today. That's where the Philistines were, that they had to fight all the time. Well, if there, nothing else, I guess we'll quit early. That's as far as I'm ready to go. Next time, we'll talk about the government or the king that they're promised. King and kingdom.
Wasn't messed up on that, didn't they? I don't think God wanted to have a king, from what I can recall. They want to have a king like these other nations, it seems like.
Yep.
I'm probably jumping your gun there, Gary.
Yeah, that's okay, but the king, we're gonna take out of Genesis before that happens. If nothing else, I'll close in prayer and we'll quit early. Oh, Father, the time that you give us is such a blessing. Help us to use it wisely, to stay in the Word and to study and to learn and allow you to lead our lives, Lord. Thank you again for these that come tonight. Just bless them as they leave. Bless their families, Father. We appreciate you and